All right, welcome back, everyone. Am I on? I don't sound on. Brother Paul, am I on? Am I? I don't. Do you hear it in the speakers? Oh, okay. I don't hear it. I guess that's good. Okay, so let me recap a little bit about what we just did in the last one. We did a lot of different things, but basically, what I wanted to identify was that. And I don't have the line up here anymore. I guess we can say here, we're identifying this pattern of 1, 2, 3 with the courtyard, holy place, and most holy place. And what I wanted to show is that that pattern can be seen in the Millerite history, can be seen in the line of Christ, can be seen in our history, and all these different reform lines as you go through. And we just briefly mentioned a couple of those in brevity. And the last thing we were just showing was that in this history, in this line here, this top line here, this is your macroscopic view. This is the biggest level we're looking at. But as we're saying with fractals, you can go in and out of zoom. And that's what we're going to call these. These is 1x magnification, 2x magnification, and 3x magnification. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to zoom in into this line. And the reason I brought in this here, I'll explain in a minute, these 2 temple cleansings. But let me first just re-say this. So we have the close of probation, and the close of probation is going to get brought down here in this illustration, because we're going to zoom into this history here. And this gives us 9/11, 9/11, and it's going to put the Sunday law here for us. Now, the reason I wanted to bring in the 2 temple cleansings is because if you can show that there's 2 temple cleansings in the time period of Christ, and you can show there's 2 temple cleansings in the time period of the Millerites, and you can show, then you must be able to show that there's 2 temple cleansings in our history. But Sister White just says it. She says that Revelation 18, 1 through 3, and Revelation 18, verse 4 are the two calls that go to the churches. And this one is representing the fall of Babylon. Babylon is fallen, and then come out of her, my people. So you have 2 distinct calls. And we identified that judgment begins in the house of God, and then it's going to go to the heathen. He always judges his people first. So the reason that's important is because when you look at our line, you find that God's people are going to first be judged by Revelation 18, 1 through 3. And Revelation 18, 1 through 3 is 9/11. 1 through 3. Now, we're just going to read a quote or two just to show that, to confirm that thought. And I think we'll touch back on that as we go forward, as we address one of the questions later on. But let me find the first quote. Okay, so let's go to Brother Jeff's notes again. He provided us with lots of good notes. This is the first page of the same page we've been looking at. We already read this one, but I want to just delve into it a little bit. This is the third quote from the bottom, sorry. The latter rain is to fall upon the people of God. A mighty angel is to come down from heaven, and the whole earth is to be lightened with his glory. So Sister White unequivocally connects the falling of the latter rain with the angel of Revelation 18, verses 1 through 3. Do we see that? Okay, because Revelation 18, 1 through 3, let's just read those quickly. Revelation 18, 1 through 3. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory, and he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So that's 1 through 3. And in verse 1 specifically, we have what Sister White is referencing here from Review and Herald. She again says that the latter rain is to fall upon the people of God, and a mighty angel is to come down from heaven, and the whole earth is to be lightened with his glory. So she directly links the latter rain with this angel. Now, for brevity, and we're not going to go into the full study of it, but we're going to touch on it in a little bit actually. But I just want to read this one quotation. This is from Life Sketches 411, paragraph 5. Life Sketches 411, paragraph 5. Now comes the word that I have declared, that New York is to be swept away by a tidal wave. This I have never said. I have said, as I looked at the great buildings going up there, story after story, what terrible scenes will take place when the Lord shall arise to shake terribly the earth. Then the words of Revelation 18, 1 through 3 will be fulfilled. The whole of the 18th chapter of Revelation is a warning of what is coming on the earth, but I have no light in particular in regards to what is coming on New York. Only I know that one day the great buildings there will be thrown down by the turning and overturning of God's power. From the light given me, I saw that that destruction is in the world. One word from the Lord, one touch of his mighty power, and these massive structures will fall. Scenes will take place, the fearfulness of which we cannot imagine. So here we see that Sister White is identifying, without saying the name, of course, that 9/11, 2001, these great buildings fall, and when those buildings fall, she's identifying in that paragraph there in Life Sketches that Revelation 18, 1 to 3 will be fulfilled. And when she does this, she tells us that the latter rain begins to fall, and the time, she told us in the other quotation, Review and Herald, April 21st, 1891, that when the latter rain is falling, that this is also the time period when a mighty angel will descend, and she quotes Revelation 1 through 3. So she's going to connect, through bringing these two quotes together, she brings the falling of the buildings in New York, the latter rain, and the angel of Revelation 18 all together, very easily and simplistically to see. So this is why we're identifying 9/11 as the time period when Revelation 18, 1 to 3 is being fulfilled. And this is the beginning of the testing process for Adventism. And what I want us to see there, and connecting it back to these temple cleansings, is that now Adventism begins to be tested, which is God's people. And when they're done being tested, and their closed doors here at the at the Sunday Law, that once that takes place, now the message is going to switch, and it's going to go to the heathen, or to the Gentiles, to the rest of the world. So you again have two temple cleansings being marked here in this history. And we know, we can see really easily that as Adventists, we know that the great work for us at the end of the world is to bring in the 11th hour workers. Amen? That's the big ingathering that we're trying to accomplish. But the problem that we have in Adventism is we're very, very familiar with the history from the Sunday Law to the close of probation. Sister White just gives us this history. It's explicitly said, the history from the Sunday Law to the close of probation and thereafter. So we start our work in our minds here at the Sunday Law with what she's given us. But what we failed to see in this history is actually that there's a preparatory work that takes place just before that history here that prepares God's people for this event so they can begin their work in earnest. And this is one of the great blindness that has come upon us, is that we've failed to see the preparatory work that we need to have just before the Sunday Law crisis. Because if we don't have our vessel, our collective vessel or our individual vessel cleansed, how can we give a message? You can't give something you don't have, so to speak. So what I want us to see here at this level is that we're looking at the history, the big scale of Adventism in the world. So you have first Adventism, then the world, 9/11 to the close of probation. So our next magnification we see is that we can look at the history of Adventism and extrapolate that and go into depth into that history. We can zoom into it. So what happens in this history is that you take the Sunday Law, you can take the Sunday Law and you can bring it down here to the close of probation, because we know Adventism's Close of probation is at the Sunday law. And let me add this waymark here. And what you see is that this history from 9/11 to the Sunday law also is going to illustrate the first, second, and third angels' messages, just like we see above here. So what we see is that, I've got to figure out how to draw this line, is that this waymark comes down here, and we understand this to be the midnight cry, and this is going to be consistently 9/11. So we understand this to be the midnight cry. Now, the way we get this to be the way we understand this to be the midnight cry is by overlaying the history of the pioneers. And so, I guess I was going to do it later, but it actually fits pretty well now with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to address our question that we had. And the question is this. And correct me if I'm wrong about the question. How do we understand, or what, maybe how's the wrong word, can I explain the combining and blending work that takes place? Is that correct? Okay. So let's try to do that now. So to do that, I'm going to go to this board, I think. That's probably the easiest way to do it, so I don't have to erase anything. And I have a little chart here. Okay, so let's draw the Millerite line. Okay. So this is 17, we'll make this small. This is 1798. And I'm just going to run through the reform line here. I'm not going to go into all the details of it as we go through, but let me just lay out the structure really quick, and then we'll come back through and we'll just talk about it for a minute. This is August 11th, 1840. This is October 22nd, 1844, and this is April 19th, 1844. And okay. And then we have right here, we have the midnight cry. And this is August 15th, 1844. Okay, so let's just talk about the Millerite history for a minute, just so we can get that into our minds. So here, 1798, we have the arrival of the first angel's message. And before that time period, we had the period of darkness, or the 1260 years of papal persecution. And Sister White says that how does she say it? The message of Revelation 14, this is a paraphrase, can't be given, could not have been given before the time period that this period of papal persecution ended. It had to be done at the end of that time period as to allow the environment. And from this point forward, from 1798, we have Miller. Miller is going to have an increase of knowledge in this time period. And his increase of knowledge is because of the unsealing of the book of Daniel and Revelation. And so from this point forward, he now has an increase of knowledge upon this history, and it leads him to what we call the formalization. And what the formalization is, I'm just going to put form. What the formalization is if I came to you and I said, guys, I have this really nice bit of information, and I've been looking at Daniel 8:13. I'm not really sure what it's about, but I see that there's something there. And I understand that the sanctuary is significant. That's being talked about in those verses. And 2,300 days has to be something. You would say, if you were, maybe it would be rude to say it this way, but it gets the point across. You would say something like, come back when you have a little bit more information about it. You obviously don't fully understand what you're discussing yet. And that's the relationship between in part between this increase of knowledge and the formalization. The time of the increase of knowledge is the time of study, where the truths that are going to be presented to this generation of people that Miller's getting are being studied out during this time, but the formalization is where those truths become put together. They make a nice little package, and I get all my gems and I put them together and I say, here, look at this. And now I'm able to give a coherent message that can test someone, because God always puts his message into a nice package before he gives it to his people. In fairness, I guess. And we mark this date as 1833. This is the falling of the stars that took place here, and these are my little stars. And this is where Miller where he gets his credentials, and he now begins to more formally speak to a larger group of people, and he continues to do that all the way through this history. And this takes us to the empowerment of the first angel. And this is, let me do it this way, 1E, the empowerment of the first angel. This is Revelation 10. Revelation 10. The angel of Revelation 10 is going to descend. And Sister White clearly says this when she talks about if you look in the Great Controversy, you look at the chapters where she's talking about this history here, she tells us that this is where the angel of Revelation Revelation 10 is going to descend, and it's going to have this little book in its hand. It's going to test that generation, and they have to eat it, or John has to eat it, representing his people at the end of the world, or the Millerites specifically that we're looking at. And what happens on this date, and this is, we have 1840, but let me add some detail. This is August 11th, 1840. What's going to happen here is, the reason that we call it the empowerment of the first angel is because the message of the first angel is the message that is being given here by Miller in this time period. It's the message of the soon coming judgment. He was already predicting the judgment that would come down here, though he was calling this 1843. And what he does, what the empowerment does is it proves his message that he's giving here. And it does that because it proves the methodology in which he uses. Now, what happens on August 11th, 1840 is we have the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which was predicted in Revelation 9, and specifically the person used to do this was Josiah Litch. So Josiah Litch has this prediction back here in 1838, and he begins to make this prediction 2 years in advance, and when it comes to pass, everyone knows that the methodology that Josiah Litch was using is the correct methodology, because he used it to make this prediction, and the prediction came true, so it was confirmed. But specifically, the methodology that he's using was the rules of William Miller. He was using the methodology, the message of Miller to make that prediction. And so Miller's message, or the message of the first angel, is now empowered, and it begins to be a worldwide message, and Sister White says that this message is going to go all the way around the world. During this time period, it goes to every mission station in the world, and a great religious awakening takes place. Is awakening the right word? During this time period from 1840 to 1844. It was a glorious manifestation of the power of God this time period. So that's just really basic. I'm kind of going fast. During this time period, you have the foundations being laid, and the foundations being laid here is a reference to the time period of the temple. In the time of Ezra, sorry. Is that Ezra? In the time of Ezra, where the foundation of the new temple is going to be laid. And if you line up that history, and we kind of talked about it last presentation about the history of Ezra and our history. At this point here, if you line up these lines, you see that you have the first decree being given, and right after the first decree is given, you have the foundations being laid with Zerubbabel and those who are coming out of Babylon at that time. Sorry, it wasn't Ezra. It wasn't Ezra. I don't know why you guys let me say Ezra. Cyrus. It was Cyrus. It was Cyrus during this time, King Cyrus, and and you have Zerubbabel laying the foundation. He's going to put the capstone on. You have that group of people. Sorry, I was thinking about the third angel. And during this time period here, you have the foundation being laid, which lines up with the first angel being empowered because it's a worldwide message and some other factors. But my point is, here, the foundation's being laid. Foundation's being laid is you have the 43 chart, the 1843 chart in this history, soon after. And from that point, you're going to have an activity, and the enemy is connected to this point here, to April 19th. And what we see there is, this is the year 1842, connected to this chart here, that they're going to make this chart, and soon after they're making this chart, I believe they make it in May. In June, everyone is going to close, all the Protestants are going to close their doors to the Millerites and their message. And by the time April 19th comes with the first disappointment, which is the arrival of the second angel's message, as described by Sister White in The Great Controversy, she says that all the Protestants have closed their door and they've fully rejected the message, and we continue forward in this history. And now the Millerites are just the ones being tested because all the Protestants have fallen away from this message. And this takes us to the Midnight Cry, and the Midnight Cry is the empowerment of the second angel's message. And I think she says that this angel that comes down here just gives power to the second angel, something to that effect, for a nice Spirit of Prophecy quote that just says it. So here we see Samuel Snow's arriving at the Exeter camp meeting in Boston, and he's going to give the Midnight Cry, and the Midnight Cry is where the living testimony gets revived, and Brother Jeff was talking about this last night. This is the living testimony, and that gets revived, and it's going to, they're going to have this kind of, the Spirit of Prophecy describes it as a tidal wave kind of work. It's going to spread all over the United States at that time, where they come finally to the third angel's arrival, which is October 22nd, where the door closes. So that's a real brief synopsis of that history, just for our recollection, or for those who didn't know. So I want to add our line on top of this, and this is where we're going to answer my brother's question about the combining and blending. And first off, why we do it, and secondly, when do we do it? So let's look at this now. So here in our history, and what I forgot to, I don't know how I said 1798 without mentioning the time of the end, without just saying it. But 1798 is the time of the end. This is the fulfillment of Daniel, the several places in Daniel where the time of the end is being fulfilled. Specifically, one of those that we're going to talk about is Daniel 11, verse 40. Daniel 11, verse 40 is where the king of the south is going to push at the king of the north, and this is atheistic France attacking the papacy, and they take him out, and they dethrone him, and now you have the death of the papacy. So you have the king of the south attacking the king of the north. And no, I'm not proving who the king of the south or the king of the north is. We just don't have time for it, for those who may not be familiar with it. But in the second part of that verse, part B of that verse, you have a retaliatory effort or attack by the king of the north, and now the king of the north is going to attack the king of the south. And we're marking this at the time of the end for our history, which is 1989, where atheistic or communistic Russia, representing the same role as France, and it's really neat. If you ever have time, if you look online, if you trace the history from the French Revolution, which is atheistic France that we see here, all the way down, you can kind of follow that belief system of atheism as it makes its way through Europe, and you can find that it nests itself in Russia. And I believe, I always get this mixed up, which came first, Mark or Lenin? Marxism or Lenin? Marxism came first? Can anyone confirm that for me? Bad history students in here. Marxism came first, so Mark, he gets it from him. Yeah, okay, so I believe it was Karl Marx who goes to France, and he gets many of his ideas from the French Revolution, from the Jacobians. from the French revolutionaries. What? Yeah. Amen. He was in. Okay, so he's in France, in Paris, studying, where he's making his manifesto, and in 1844 it was published. And you can trace, my point is, you can trace very clearly the way that atheism comes from France, and it worms its way into Marxism, which becomes communism eventually through a couple steps. And you have the Bolshevik Revolution, and so on and so forth. That leads to communism, the USSR eventually. I'm skipping some steps, of course, but my point is you can trace the steps from atheistic France to communistic USSR Russia very clearly. The historical steps are there. And my point is, so this power, the King of the South, gets transferred by this time, the time of the end, to France, to Russia, or specifically the USSR. So from here we see an increase of knowledge that's taking place, and again the book of Daniel is unsealed just like it was in 1798, but here the part of Daniel that is unsealed is Daniel 11:40 to 45. So now the message is Daniel 11:40 to 45. Daniel 11:40 to 45. And we have the formalization with the Time of the End magazine. Time of the End magazine. And what this marks, just like it did for Miller, was that now we have this information of Daniel 11:40 to 45 put in a nice little package, and that package can be given to people to be tested on. And so here, now we've arrived to the point of our question, our answer. And so before we talk any more about that, I want to just read a couple quotes. And we're going to come back to this, don't worry. We're going to bring it all full circle. Because it fits in nicely, actually. These. So let me find where I am. Okay, so I'm just going to read a couple quotes quickly. This is 6T18. Testimonies, Volume 6, page 18. The three angels' messages of Revelation 14 are represented as flying in the midst of heaven, symbolizing the work of those who proclaim the first, second, and third angels' messages. All are linked together. Now, she's not talking about the people, she's talking about the messages. These three messages, the first, second, and the third angel, are linked together. Next quotation. This is 1888 Materials 804, page 804. God has given the messages of Revelation 14 their place in the line of prophecy, and their work is not to cease till the close of this earth's history. The first and second angels' messages are still true for this time and are to run parallel with this which follows. The third angel proclaims his warning with a loud voice. After these things, said John, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. In this illumination, the light of all three angels are combined. So what she's saying there is that the first, second, and third angel's messages are all combined in the work of this fourth angel of Revelation 18. And this is 1888 Materials 804. Okay, and I think I'll just stop with those two. Those prove the point enough. And the point I want us to see is this combining work of the messages as you come to the history of Revelation 18. And let me just give... You have the quote that says, it's the great work to combine them? It is the... I may or may not have it here. I think so. Yes, okay, here it is. It was the next one, actually. This is 7 BC 949. The Lord is about to punish the world for its iniquity. He is about to punish religious bodies for their rejection of the light and truth which has been given them. The great message, combining the first, second, and third angels' messages, is to be given to the world. This is the burden of our work. So our work at the end of the world, under the fourth angel, which we read in the previous paragraph, is to combine the first three angels, the first, second, and third angels' messages together. So what my brother's asking is about a maybe phenomenon's the wrong word, but this thing that we do with the combining work, and it's this. You have, I'll do it over here in a minute, but let me just illustrate it here, is you have your 1, 2, 3 here, and what we do is we take the second angel's message and we combine it with the first angel's message. So what's going to happen is we're going to bring this line and we're going to bring it here. And you end up putting the second angel's message here. You would end up having the first empowerment with the second arrival here. And then you still have the third down here. And we'll talk about that. But this diagonal kind of combining work is what he's asking about. So let's try to show. First of all, Sister White says we're supposed to do that work, but secondly, what we want to see is that Revelation 18 is a combination of these angels. And I think Brother Jeff touched on it a little bit last night or yesterday, but we're going to go into a little bit more depth on that right now. So let's go to Revelation 18. Or we read Revelation 18, so let's read Revelation 14. Now, we're going to flip back and forth between Revelation 14 and 18, so keep your fingers in one or the other, or both of them, I guess. Okay. So let's talk about the first angel's message for a moment. The first angel's message, let's just read it. Verse 6, "And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, kindred, and tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of water." So this message, this everlasting gospel message, has several characteristics attached to it. First off, in the time period of Miller, where we see the first angel being empowered here in 1840, this message is the end of the second woe. And we reference that with Revelation 9, just another way of saying the end of the second woe is another way of just talking about Revelation 9. The end of the second woe is the end of the time prophecy that takes you to 1840 that Josiah Litch predicted 2 years before in 1838 with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And you can see it here on the charts. Maybe not everyone can see it. You can see it on both of them. You can all see this one. You have the first, second woes being identified here, and they're both being identified as the Mohammedans or Islam. And so what we see is that in Revelation 9, we have the end of this woe here, and what happens here to Islam? They're restrained. A restraint is marked here in 1840 on August 11th. Now the Ottoman Empire submits to these four Christian nations, and at the beginning of that time period, you had the four sultans who were, let me say it this way, you had the emperor who was submitting to the four sultans. So you have a reversal at the beginning, or at the end, than you did at the beginning. First, the Christian submits to four Islamic powers, and then at the end you have the one Islamic power submitting to four Christian powers. That's a nice little chiasm you see there. But anyway, this is taking place here on August 11th, 1840. So we have a restraint of Islam being marked there. So the next thing we see, let me just do this before I forget to do it. So I'll go back and forth. We'll go back and forth from there to there. So on 9/11, do we have a restraint of Islam? How do we see the restraint of Islam? The Patriot Act. We have from that point forward, we have the Patriot Act, which was implemented against Islamic terrorists. It was in the United States. But from that point forward, Bush goes to the United Nations and he says, you're either for us or against us. And from that point forward, we have a global war on terrorism from 9/11 all the way forward. And from this point, if you're a Muslim, you're now at odds with everyone else at this point, with all the other nations of the world, and now you're socially restrained, economically restrained, in every way possible, you're restrained at this point going forward. So the Islamic power is now restrained. How else do we see it marked more prophetically? What gets restrained here other than the Islamic power? The four winds. So the four winds gets restrained here, but Sister White calls these four winds what? An angry horse seeking to break loose and bring death and destruction upon the world. And this angry horse is not coincidentally this angry horse here that we see on the charts. Islam is associated with this horse, and Sister White calls it an angry horse that's seeking to break loose. So prophetically, we have the four winds being restrained, which is Islam as a symbol, but it also is described by the spirit of prophecy as wars and pestilence and strife and turmoil. So you have Islam and the four winds being restrained here. And they're going to be restrained here so the sealing can be done, and we'll talk about that, I think. So going forward, you have a descent of an angel. So the angel of Revelation 18 comes down, and the first angel in the previous history comes down here in August 11th. This is Revelation 10. So we have this descent of these two angels. What? 18. No, you have Revelation 10. I meant to say Revelation 10. You have Revelation 10 up here, and you have Revelation 18 here. I might have said it backwards as I was actually saying it, but... So you have Revelation 18 and Revelation 10, and these two histories both have an angel descending. Okay. And in the history of August 11th, 1840, this is a worldwide work, and we talked about the quote from Sister White where she says that this message goes to all the mission stations around the world. The message of 9/11 went around the world from that point forward. That now becomes a worldwide message that's given in this history going forward. Just like this history here, 1840 to 44 is a glorious manifestation of the power of God, and from that point forward there's this impetus. From the point of 9/11, there's an impetus now given to God's message. So that is the first angel's message. Let's talk about the second angel's message. The second angel is really easy to see. And it's easy to see because in Revelation 10 or Revelation 14, the message is Babylon is fallen. We're over here, sorry. We're talking about the combining work. So here you have the second angel's message where Babylon is fallen. But in the message of Revelation 18, you also have Babylon is fallen. So what we see here is a combination of the first and the second angel's messages. And I'm going to do it this way just to depict that. So you have the first angel being empowered, and with the first angel being empowered, you have a restraint of Islam, you have a worldwide work, and am I missing anything else? That's good enough. So you have those two things, but in the second angel's message, in the second angel's arrival specifically, you have the message of Babylon is fallen. So here we see at 9/11, we have this combining work of the first empowerment and the second angel's arrival. And so this line that I'm about to draw is what my brother is talking about, this diagonal that we make here. That takes us, it's not a very good diagonal, but it's a diagonal that takes you to, that brings the second angel's message and the first empowerment together in one message. And now from this point forward, we're going to see an overlap between the angels. So we have the first arrival here, and we have the first empowerment and the second arrival here. And I'm kind of doing this a little bit quick. So we still have to have a rest of a line. So how do we see the rest of the line from here? So let's continue to draw that in this illustration. So I'll do the bigger scale, and then we'll come back and we can show a fractal in here. But anyway, so we have at this point here the second angel's message, or the arrival of the second angel's message is not the arrival of the second angel's message. The arrival of the second angel is here, but the second step, if I can say it in a generic way like that, the second step or the second angel now looks like this. We're now looking at the Sunday law. Sunday law. Oops. The Sunday law in the United States. And you can see that over here, if we go over here. So here we have, this is a generic version of that line there, or a less detailed one. You have 9/11, Sunday law, close of probation. So coming back over to this line, you now see that the Sunday law is this second waymark here. You have 9/11, now you have the second angel's message here with the Sunday law, and finally, bringing that line from over there, you have the close of probation. And this part is easy. The question really is about 9/11 and that you're combining these two messages right here as you go forward. And that looks a little bit confusing at first step because you're pulling everything to the side like that. Now, what you have here, one second. So what you have here is the empowerment. What you have here is the overall, the big scale empowerment of the second angel's message. Second angel's message is going to be empowered here, and you have the arrival of the third angel. Now, the third angel arriving is when the image of the beast test begins. And we know at a global scale, a big scale level, you now have that image of the beast test being marked at the Sunday law. Now the whole world, Revelation 13, the whole world is going to be tested upon this Sunday law, this image of the beast test, in preparation for the close of probation, which is the third empowerment here. So what happens is you move all of this and you bring it this way. Now another way to look at this, I meant to do this before and I forgot why I didn't, but you have 1844 here, and the third angels, you have the first, second angel, and now you have the third angel arriving, and it's going to go into history, and it's looking for an empowerment, if I can say it that way. So now it's looking for its empowerment, and where's the first place it comes to be empowered? 1888. So in 1888, we have the potential, I'm running out of board. You have the potential of the latter rain to be empowered. But what happens? Jones and Wagner give the latter rain message, as Sister White calls it, and do they accept it? Does Adventism accept it? No. They reject that message, and the angel continues to go into history looking for this empowerment. Now, I kind of hurt myself here by not having enough boards, so I'm going to come down here. So it's going to go into history from 1888, still looking for its empowerment, and it's going to come to, now I'm going to do this on a macroscopic scale. Now normally when we look at this, we're looking at a fractal of that history, and we'd put 9/11. But as you look at it at a bigger scale, this message gets empowered in the Sunday law crisis. And so I'll just leave it generically at that for now, because I don't want to confuse anyone, because I realize I'm doing a couple different levels at the same time. So, but that's a depiction of what's happening. And this is, if we brought in the 3-1 combination again, this time period here of the first, second, and third, they combine together, and now they're going through history looking for a fulfillment, and they're going to come into our history, and when they reach our history, they're going to now be empowered, which is represented by the fourth angel, and they're all going to do their work over again within the fourth. So that's just a different level, bringing in the 3-1 combination there. But anyway, so this combining work that we have here now pulls the second angel's message over to 1840, and they combined here at 9/11 because of the message of Revelation 18, which is the message of the second and first angel's message when they come together. Does that make sense? Okay, did that answer that question? Yeah. Okay. So there's more we could put on that line, and I'm not going to at this moment for time's sake. So I'm going to go back over to this board. And we kind of helped ourselves because we've dealt a little bit with our line. And so we can come into here and have a little bit more detail. So let's go back over here for a minute. And let's look at our next line of magnification. So the first thing we said, one of the things we said, was that when we come to this history here, we have Adventism in the world. We have these 2 temple cleansings. Now, what we've realized is that in our history, you can go even further with the illustration of 2 temple cleansings. And what I mean by that is that in the work of Adventism, there's another 2 temple cleansings. And the best way to understand this is in the model. What's the best? I'm trying to think of an example of this. I had one and I just lost it. That's the one I was looking for. So when Christ came to earth and he died on the cross, he's going to be resurrected, but is he resurrected by himself? Is he resurrected by himself? No. Another group of people, or witnesses, are going to also be resurrected with him. And what does Christ represent in terms of the 16th the 16th day of the first month is first fruits. So you have first fruits, and first fruits is when Christ is being resurrected, and 2 days after Passover. And when he's resurrected, he's representing this first fruit offering, but Christ isn't by himself. He's resurrected with another group. So you have 2 groups within this resurrection of Christ. You have Christ, number 1, and you have those who are resurrected with him. So you have these 2 groups in there. So I want to illustrate that here on this line. What do I have there already? I have 9/11, Midnight Cry, Sunday Law. Okay. So within this history, we have another, and again, we're taking the history of Adventism. I should write it. You have Adventism, and now Adventism gets broken down, or we're zooming in, and again, our theme is fractals, and it's the same pattern at different levels of magnification. We have our 1, 2, 3 up here, we have our 1, 2, 3 here, and we're dealing with this one now here. So what we see is that Adventism, the time period from 9/11 to the Sunday Law, we zoom in, and we get more definition now, and what we see now the Midnight Cry. And the way we get the Midnight Cry is from the Millerite history that we have over there. The Midnight Cry now becomes the second step for us because we're looking at the history of Ezra 7:9, which we mentioned last time. We have the first day of the first month, the first day of the 5th month, and the 10th day of the 7th month, representing this history. And what do we want to say about this? So again, we have 2 classes here. 1, 2. And these 2 classes are Christ, and those who are resurrected with him. I'll put others. And this all represents the first fruit offering. And we know that Adventism at the end of the world represents the first fruit offering that's going to be lifted up to the world and to the Lord as the 144,000. And we know that Adventism is, Adventists will compose the 144,000. And it's broken up into these 2 groups, the Christ and the other ones, or that's an illustration of it. Another illustration, the one that we most often use, is the sanctuary system itself. And we saw up here in Psalm 77:13 that thy way, O God, is in thy sanctuary. And what we see there is that there's 3 groups of people that operate within the sanctuary. You have the priest and the Levites and the Nethinims. So let me ask you a question. What is the difference between the priests, Levites, and the Nethinims? Or sorry, let me say it this way. Levites. What is the difference between the priests and the Levites in terms of the sanctuary system, in terms of the actual history of the priests, Levites, and Nethinims? In terms of the history, let's think historically. What? The priests were in charge. But what's the difference between the priests and the Levites and the Nethinims? There's a very specific difference between those 2 groups. The work they do, but even the people they're composed of. What? Say that again? Jews and Gentiles. Who were the Gentiles? The Nethinims. Historically, the Nethinims were actually not part of Israel. They were brought in, they were a different group of people, and I can't remember the actual tribe they were of people, but they were a group of people who get brought in and they become subservient to the Jewish nation, and they now, what? the Gibeonites. They become the Nethinims, and these Nethinims are now going to work under the priests and the Levites to help them in their work for their disobedience, their lie. And so you have the priests and the Levites being Adventism, and now you have, if we extend this line out, you have the Nethinims. How do you spell Nethinims? Is an I? Ims? Nobody knows. We all we say I Nethinims. We'll just say that. That's close enough. That seems wrong though. N-M-I-S? Okay, one person, I-M. Neth, we'll just do Neth. We'll just do the Nethinims, sorry. So we have the priests, Levites, and Nethinims, and there's a distinct difference between the priests and the Levites and these Nethinims. Even in the sanctuary service, the way they operated, there was distinct differences. And so what we see here is this is Adventism, these two groups here, and then you have the Nethinims who are going to be brought in, or in the time, yeah, that's good enough. Now, what we can see here, though, is that each one of these groups, priests, Levites, and Nethinims, you can look at their history specifically. If you just look at them and no one else, if you zoom into them, you can see that each one of these groups is tested by a 3-step testing message. Because the way the Lord deals with everyone is always the same. God's dealings with men is ever the same. And so he's going to deal with the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinims in their order and in the same way being the 3-step testing process or the everlasting gospel. So if we zoom into these histories, we'll zoom into the priests, we can see the history of the 3 steps. So let's do that now. Okay, so I'm going to do it generically, and I'm going to get some flack for this, I assume, and I'll explain why here in a minute. So I'm going to take the midnight cry, and I'm going to bring it down here, and I'm going to put the midnight cry as this point where the close of probation is, or the Sunday law, the close of probation, we'll just say that. And this becomes our second step, and we still have 9/11 here. Now, I believe Brother Jeff is going to talk about the 126 today. Are you actually going to get there? Hopefully. Probably not. Probably not. So we'll maybe talk about it in a minute if we're feeling up to it in a second, but let's just try to delve here for a minute first. So what we see is you have 9/11, and without proving it, and either Brother Jeff will get to it, or maybe I'll get to it in a minute, but what we see is you have 2014 as the second waymark here. So you have 1, 2, 3 for the priest now, and we're just looking at the priest. Let me put priest here. Priest. Okay. So we're looking at the priest now, and they have the same 1, 2, 3 that lines up with the overall structure of the 1, 2, 3 for these other groups and these other magnifications. So by definition, if this is true, this is a fractal, because you see this 1, 2, 3 pattern being displayed at 4 levels of magnification now as you zoom in within this original picture. So what we've done is we've taken this structure and we zoomed in at the end, and when we zoomed in at the end, we saw this pattern here, and it was Adventism in the world. And as we zoomed into Adventism, we saw this this same structure of 1, 2, 3, and we see the priests and the Levites. And as we zoomed into one of those, the priests, we again see the same structure. And we're seeing self-similarity at different levels of magnification as we zoom into the structure. If you look at the fern, as you look at those branches, it has the same branching pattern. And for us, it's 9/11, 2014, in the Midnight Cry. Now, the reason I might get in trouble with the Midnight Cry is because we know that this isn't the Midnight Cry. This is the Midnight Cry. Let me explain that better. So the Midnight Cry can be seen as and I hate saying it this way, but it's true, but it can be seen as a point or a period. Now you can only see it that way under very specific conditions in those differences, but it's never at the same time. And my point is, if I look generically at this point here, I'm looking at the midnight cry. If I bring midnight and the midnight cry together, I'm generically looking just at the midnight cry. Does that make sense? I did not. Okay. But we want to go into depth there. So I'm going to take that line there and I'm going to look at it more specifically, because there's some things we have to see about it. Okay, so, oops, forgot my pen. So first I want to look at the Millerite line. I want to just put that back up here for a second. You have, and I'm going to do it this way, you have the first day of the first month. You have the first day of the fifth month. You have the 10th day of the seventh month. And I'm going to erase this actually. I'll put this down here. So you have the 5th day of the 4th month, and I'll mention this in a second because we haven't touched this yet. And you have the first day of the 5th month. Okay. So if let's put Millerite dates on this. This is April 19th, and this is all the year 1844. You have July 21, you have August 15th, and you have October 22nd. And this is, again, all the year 1844. Now, April 19th, this is the first disappointment. July 21st is when Samuel Snow first gives the midnight cry message at midnight at the Boston Tabernacle, July 21st. It's marked by the pioneers, Joseph Bates, I think Himes, Lothborough, Andrews, and I want to say James Light even, but I might be wrong about that one. But anyway, the pioneers marked this, and Sister White marks it as well, and they all realize after that when they're recounting this history that July 21st is they didn't know it as the 5th day of the 4th month, but was the time when the midnight cry began to go forth. And from that point, they realized that there's some sort of empowerment to it, there's some sort of escalation in power that takes place at August 15th when he gets to the Exeter camp meeting. And finally, you have October 22nd where the door closes. And we're going to mark just a little door here. So, what I want us to see is these 4 waymarks. And I'm going to draw 2 lines. I'm going to draw 2 lines. This is 9/11. This is midnight. This is the midnight cry. And this is the Sunday law. Now, my question for you is, what level are we looking at? Who are we looking at? What group of people? Who? Adventism. Once we get past this point here, or once we're talking about the Sunday law as being the close of probation, we're looking at Adventism. And one of the most important things we have to realize when we're dealing with these fractals is because of their intricacies that you have to be specific about who you're talking about. And it's almost the best thing to do is to first identify who you're talking about. Because once you've identified who you're talking about, you can get your scale. And once you have your scale, and we know we're talking about Adventism, from 9/11 to the Sunday law, we know we're looking at this line here. Now I didn't put the little waymark here for midnight cry. I did it generically. I put them together. But what I want us to see here is that we're looking at this line. We're at the second level of magnification, if you can say it on this one. Okay, so we're looking at Adventism. Advent. And you have the same thing, first day of the first month, 5th day of the 4th month, and so on and so forth. And then you have the closed door at the Sunday law. Now, as I take the priests, which would be in this history of time, this time right here, the priests, and I want to depict this in 2 different ways. So I'm going to erase priest here so I can do it within here. Because, and I'll explain this in a minute. So you have the priests here. I'll just put priests higher. Priests. In this history. So within the priests, as we said down here, you can illustrate the same three-step testing process. And if we can illustrate those 3 steps there, and it's the same as all the other ones, then we have to be able to illustrate the depiction of Ezra 7:9 with the first day of the first month all the way to the 10th day of the 7th month. And as we do that, what we see is this, and I'm going to first draw it small. We have the first day of the first month here at 9/11 again. It stays the same. We have the 5th day of the 4th month here, and we have, I'm right. First day of the 5th month here, and the 10th day of the 7th month here. Many of us, I think we're familiar, those who have been paying attention to this, we're familiar with this line. When we see this, and I guess I still will, depict it this way as well, on a bigger scale. But the reason I like this scale, and let me just talk about this, but I'll draw this first, and then I'll tell you why I like this scale right there. So this would be, so this would be 9/11, 2014, and what we call this is the PBM, prediction before midnight, which is marking up here with August 15th or the midnight cry, then we put midnight here. Now let me explain something about this. The reason I like this history here, or this line here, is you can see the 2 levels at the same time. And when you see the 2 levels at the same time, you realize something. You realize something very important, and the very important thing is that midnight here is not midnight for the priests. Now let me explain that. How many of us are already familiar with that concept? Okay, so a couple of us are already familiar with this concept here. So that midnight is not midnight for the priests. And I know if you're new here, I'm probably going way over your head, and I'm sorry for that. And maybe we can talk about it after as we, in our breaks, about how we get to these points. But so I'm going to speak to the people who already know some of these things. So here, this midnight is not actually midnight for the priest, because if you use July 21st, which is midnight, and you have the midnight cry, and you bring it there, you find that the 5th day of the 4th month is actually way back here. And way back here is 2014. And this is PBM. And what you realize in this line is that what we're doing with midnight here is we're using it as an anchor point. Because none of this history has happened yet. The history from midnight to the Sunday law hasn't happened yet. And midnight, well, the PBM either, yeah. So we're somewhere right here, and we're looking forward to the PBM all the way to the Sunday law. And what we see is that these things haven't happened yet. And the only really concrete, and what I mean by concrete is not that in its evidence to prove it, but concrete in its, what we understand it as is the Sunday law. And what I mean by that is that the Sunday law is a point in time that we can all verify at any level of magnification, because it's just an event. But if I say midnight cry, and now I start dealing with fractals, midnight cry can be anywhere, not anywhere, but it can be in all these different places depending on how I'm looking at my magnification. It can change spots. So what we see is that the Sunday law becomes an anchor point, and that anchor point we can build off of, and then we get the midnight cry before that, and midnight. And midnight now becomes this anchor point. Now, we know what happens at these dates, but we don't have any other way to call them other than midnight and midnight cry, other than, as of recently, we can call this Raphia and Panium. Because here, when I say this is the prediction before midnight and this is midnight, that's actually inaccurate. What this is this is the midnight cry, and this is the close of probation. Or this is the midnight cry, and this is October 22nd, if I can say it that way. In that, midnight here, this midnight being marked is actually the end of, actually the midnight of Adventism that's being marked right up here. It's not the midnight for the priest because the midnight is back here for the priest. And the reason that's important is because at midnight, in the Millerite time period of July 21st, how many people's probation closed? Nobody's probation closed. They had all the way till the closed door. But we often say that at midnight our probation closes. But what we mean to say, if we're being specific, is we're saying is that at midnight, at the midnight of Adventism, here, the priest's probation closes. And the close of probation for the priest is represented by the 10th day of the 7th month. Yes, that's true, but all close of probations are illustrated by the 10th day of the 7th month in this illustration of Ezra 7:9. So as I put this door here, I'm actually looking at that from the perspective of the priest in their relationship to Levites, but in the relationship to the Advent line. Does that make sense? How many of the people that 10 minutes? Okay. Did I lose anyone? Who's already familiar with these things? Did I lose someone who's already familiar? Yes, I lost you. Oh, okay. You're being judged. What? Okay. So this line here is even. I'm going to erase this bottom line because I think when I'm illustrating the two levels at the same time, it's a little bit confusing. So my point is this: if we're looking at the priest, this line here is Ezra 7:9 for us. It begins here and it ends here. This is our closed door. So when we say midnight is that our close of probation is at midnight, what we really mean is our close of probation is at the midnight of Adventism, because we're looking at two lines. And what I meant by that anchor point is what I mean is that Raphia, this point that we call Raphia, becomes an anchor point, and now we can construct the line of the priest from this anchor point. So this is Raphia, Paneum, Sunday law, so on and so forth, bringing in the line of Daniel 11 there. And so you can see that. And that has implications. And here's one of the biggest implications that I find with this. This struck at my core more than maybe anyone else when I realized this, when I understood this. Because what happens, inadvertently, we look at the Sunday law here, but we look at the Sunday law, it jumps. It can be either a depiction of the second angel's message, the second step, or it's a depiction of the third step. Now, when we say the Sunday law, if we said something like our Sunday law is at midnight, and we're talking about Raphia here, we're actually misusing the symbol of the Sunday law, because that's not what the Sunday law is representing when you put it at this point here of midnight. What it's representing there is a close of probation. It's just like Adventism's close of probation is at the Sunday law. And I don't know the best way to say this. I've been trying to figure out a way to say it, and I still haven't come up with a good way to illustrate this. But do you see my point about how the Sunday law changes from the second and third angel? Is there going to be a Sunday law at midnight? So let me, not counter that, but let me say this. Is there a Sunday law at the close of probation? Here. Anyone? Yeah, this one, the very top one. What happens here? We haven't used this quote in a long time. What becomes universal there? The decree becomes universal. There's a Sunday law there. There's a Sunday law here. But that depiction is not the Sunday law you're talking about often when you're...
That's what I'm trying to differentiate between.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're saying there's Sunday law here, there's not Sunday law here. Can you elaborate on what you're implying by that? So is there...
What the implications of that?
Is there going to be some sort of Sunday law? I mean, I know there's different levels of the Sunday law and different...
Yeah. There's a variation of it at midnight, yes. I believe so. Unless I hear otherwise, or unless somebody proves otherwise, rather. But let me say it. What I mean is this: is you have the Sunday law jumping from the second to the third step, and they illustrate very distinctly different things when you look at one as the second step or the third step. Okay, we're at least there. So when we illustrate it as the third step here, we're looking at a close of probation. That's simple. You're looking at a close of probation where the whole line ends. And there's more you can say to that, but I'm just going to say that. It's the end of a line. It's the close of probation. But as we look at it as the second step, which I believe is the step we should look at it more as, is the second step, there's many provocative things that creates. Not problems, but really nice gems of truth. And one of those gems of truth is what is the Sunday law in the macroscopic scale? It's not the close of probation. If we're on this level, we're not looking at the close of probation because at this level we're looking at the whole world, so to speak. What is it? What happens here? What test do you have before your close of probation? The image of the beast test. So it becomes the image of the beast test here. So you have the image of the beast, which is before your closed door, if we're looking at it as the second step. So here, coming down to this history, and you can't see it on this line. You can't see it on this line. But if we were to bring this history down, what we would see, if I were to overlay it there, and that's just not a good depiction there, you would see this. You have 9/11. The 5th day of the 4th month becomes the Sunday law, if I bring that line down here. Now, the loud cry becomes this PBM, this middle part here, this midnight cry, and then you have the close of probation here. So you see this relation from Sunday law, loud cry, close of probation, and what this really tells us is that we're already in the priest definition or the priest time of the Sunday law crisis. Now, it's not the Sunday law crisis that's Sister White's talking about in terms of when the decree goes forth and the stamp is impressed, in terms of the Revelation 13 in that kind of way. What I mean is the event. It's obviously not the event of the Sunday law. That hasn't happened yet. But the symbolic characteristics that we can derive from that event have now already taken place, or we're in the process of fulfilling these things from 2014. And what Brother Jeff was talking about yesterday, he read a quote. Let me find it. It's on the first page, the same page we've been working off of his notes. The very top of the page, the truth for this time, the third angel's message is to be proclaimed with a loud voice, meaning with increasing power as we approach the great final test. Now, you have to do some digging when you look at the great final test and you look at the image of the beast. Now, if you don't look carefully, you see a discrepancy and you see a contradiction between the way Sister White uses her language for the image of the beast and the way she uses the language for the close of probation. But the close of probation is the great final test. And as we approach the great final test, we have the image of the beast conflict that takes place from here, image of the beast, which takes place from the Sunday law to the close of probation. And what she says is that the loud cry is this increase of power here that's taking place. So the loud cry is an event, but it's also representing this period of time. And I'll just close with this thought because we're out of time. If you look at the history of the Millerites, on the 5th day of the 4th month, July 21st, we have the midnight cry message. But if we look at August 15th, we also have the midnight cry message. What was the difference between these two messages? There wasn't any. There was no difference in the message that he gave. Where was the difference? There was, what? It was louder. It increased in power. What did you say, Brother John? The effect. The effect is going to change. And what happened on July 21st is he gives this message in the Boston Tabernacle, and I forgot the amount of people. What? It's 3,000? I was thinking 3,000 too, but I felt like I was wrong for saying that. It's either 2,000 or 3,000 people are going to hear him at the Boston Tabernacle. And they're going to take that message and they're going to be affected by it. And they go back to their places and start preaching that message. But the distinction that the pioneers make themselves, I think I don't know if Himes makes it. Loughborough, and I think Andrews and Bates, I think, those three, I'm pretty sure, make the distinction when they're talking about July 21st, that they distinctly tell you that there's a difference between these two events, and the difference was the effect. But what happened was, at July 21st, all the people that received that message and went back to their places were separate. They were these little individual atoms around the world, around the United States, we'll say, in that history. But as they come to the August 15th, and that same message is given again, but with more power, they all unite into one cohesive group, and now they give that same message, but that message is now given with increased power and with the effect of unity, which we talked about last night. Unity is the thing that Satan's trying to stop, because when unity comes into the message, it's power. Unity is power. Organization is power, if we can say it that way. And so what takes place here, and if I'm being honest, I don't understand yet, but I'm sure we will, the distinction in this line. In this line here, if you're looking at the actual Sunday law and the actual close of probation, I don't understand what event is here in that line. But I know that when you bring that down to this history, you can show very clearly that loud cry event or time is illustrated by the PBM here, which we understand to be several different things, one of which is organization, the unity aspect, if we're touching on that. And there's several other things. But my point is that this is represented by that midnight cry power. This is midnight. This is the midnight cry power where they are now in unity. Does anyone have any questions on that before we close? Okay, let's close. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you again for this time. We thank you for unfolding these truths to us, Lord, that we could be counted worthy or given the opportunity, Lord, to see these things. We pray that you would give us all a receptive heart to these things, whether we understand them in their complete fullness or not. And we pray for the continued outpouring of your Spirit and this knowledge to us, Lord. We pray that the Holy Spirit would be poured out upon us as we continue these meetings on your holy Sabbath day, and we ask for that special blessing that you have given and that you have promised to us on the Sabbath day, that you would be closer with us today than any other day, that you desire to answer prayer today more than any other day. And we just pray that you would be with us now. In Jesus' name, amen.